Good morning. Thanks, Lee, for that introduction. Thanks, our WP, for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here. I want to push this button. Good. And thanks, Seth, if you're tuned in remotely, for connecting me with our WP, and thanks, Morgan, for managing my being here. I didn't really know a whole lot about RWP, so when I got contact from Morgan, I got on the site and I looked at the conference information, and I saw this sentence: in 10 years, what we wish we had done to protect the Illinois River and the watershed. And it's such a good way to approach our thinking. I really appreciated seeing that. And I followed it over to the design center that Lee just mentioned. Very impressive. But it says the goal of low impact development is to sustain a site's pre-development hydrologic regimes, slow it down, spread it out, soak it in. And so we can manage stormwater. Yesterday, we talked about how that can happen, how we can be friends with stormwater, how we can use breakfast cereal as a model of how to manage stormwater. All really good stuff. As Lee said, I come from a regulatory background, and so my presentation today will be more on a deeper dive into the Clean Water Act and what the Clean Water Act requires in terms of stormwater management. So I'll push a button here. Here's what, whoops, I did that. I got to push. So here's what I want to do. We're coming up on the Clean Water Act's 50th year anniversary next year. We're less than a year away from that now. And so I want us to look at what the Clean Water Act says about stormwater. I'm going to get into what Arkansas what we see 10 years from now about what we should be doing now. Okay, the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. It came out of the environmental movement of the 60s. I'm a 60s kid. I was there on college campuses in the late 60s and early 70s. In the 60s, we had three issues that were big on college campuses. Vietnam tore this nation apart. Race issues were very much on our minds. But then we also had the environmental movement was coming into focus. And so the environmental movement, our environmental awakening of the 60s, resulted in legislation in the 70s. 1970, the first Earth Day, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. We had in the 70s TSCA, Toxic Substances, RCRA, Resource Conservation, SMACRA, Surface Mining Reclamation and Control Act, the Endangered Species Act. Everything was going on in the 70s. Now we had wonderful ambition, but we were hopelessly naive. So we did things in the Clean Water Act, like we said, well, it's 72 now, so by 83, no more toxics, nothing toxic is going to be discharged. The what I've got on this slide is under Title III, 1A under Title III, 301A, is called the Clean Water Act Discharge Prohibition. And I'm going to say it's the single most powerful sentence anywhere in the United States having anything to do with water, because it says, unless the government tells you you can discharge pollutants, you can't. That's different than before the Clean Water Act was passed. Before the Clean Water Act was passed, there was federal law saying you can't cause pollution. But that puts the burden on the government, say that person's causing pollution, and so we've got to stop it. Now it says you cannot discharge pollutants unless the government says that you can discharge pollutants. Now it says pollutants, but it doesn't say stormwater. Stormwater was not a word that was in the 72 Act. I said my undergraduate career lapsed over between the late 60s and early 70s. I took courses in hydraulics, hydrology, groundwater hydrology, open channel flow, sediment transport, dam design, never a course titled stormwater. And there's a reason for that. And the reason was the science didn't really understand and appreciate the consequences of stormwater discharges. It wasn't until the NERP, the Nationwide Urban Runoff Program, that was research done from late 70s until early 80s, published in December of 83, that we saw what stormwater really was. And over 75% of the urban runoff samples that were taken around the country, they found concentrations of lead, copper, and zinc. And keep in mind that in the late 70s, it took a lot of lead for us to find it. You had to have 2 or 3 times as much lead in the water as we now consider safe to drink in order to measure, to detect lead at all. So science kind of catching up with stormwater into the 80s. EPA did not initially regulate stormwater in 72. NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, went to the DC circuit in 75 and said, look, they got to regulate stormwater. And EPA said, well, we're too busy. We've got all this other stuff to do. And the court said, well, that's all interesting, but that's your problem. The statute's clear and you've got to regulate stormwater. But EPA really didn't know what they were doing until the NERP came out. And so it was not until 87 that the word stormwater worked its way into the Clean Water Act. And it shows up as 402P. P is kind of down the alphabet. 402 didn't have that many items in it before, but now it has 402P, and it says large and medium municipal separate, important word, separate storm sewer systems must have permits, are subject to regulation. And 11 categories of industry are subject to regulation. Number 10 on that list of 11 is construction sites over 5 acres. 5 acres and over is the 10th on that list of 11 industrial categories that have to have permits. But then the other thing the statute said was, EPA, you guys go out and figure out who else besides the ones we've just enumerated for you, who else needs to have a permit. And we want you to identify those sources that need to be permitted, and we're giving you authority to regulate them also. And so the sources that were explicitly identified in the 87 legislation, we now call phase 1. There's phase 1 and phase 2 you won't find in the 87 Act. But they sort of make sense, and we adopted it, and we call phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 2, when we're talking about construction sites, is construction sites 1 acre to 5. EPA said, you know, Congress, you got it right when you said 5 acres, but we think it ought to really go down to 1 acre. And so we're regulating construction sites of 1 acre or more. In MS4s, municipal separate storm sewer systems, EPA, when they looked at it, said, well, your definition of large, 250,000 population or higher, your definition of medium, 100,000 population and 200,000, those, you're off to a good start, but we really think it ought to be any urbanized area, and that's the census urbanized, so that's 50,000 population. And besides that, we think it ought to be any population of 10,000 or more that has 1,000 population per square mile. Those ought to be included. And then on top of that, any MS4 that the permit authority designates, and they would designate it based on a problem. In Tennessee, that's what we did. Anytime we had a listed or identified as impaired water course that was in an urbanized area, even if it didn't meet the population level, we said, you know what, you're a member of the club. You're going to be an MS4 in Tennessee. Okay, so here's what this looks. Am I staying a slide behind? I think so. Okay, so here's what this looks like on the map. This map is a few years out of date, but not a lot. You can't grow from a phase 1 to a phase 2. Phase 1 was on the 1990 census. In Tennessee, we have Nashville, Memphis, large, Chattanooga, Knoxville, medium. We have other cities now that are over 100,000. They're still phase 2. So here's what's required for municipal separate storm sewer systems. Just these two things. They've got to prohibit non-stormwater. Now I've got an asterisk on that, meaning that there are exceptions to what non-stormwater can be discharged with their storm sewer system. Sources like air conditioning condensate, landscape irrigation, waters that would be very difficult to exclude and are not expected to be of any consequence. But the stormwater you do discharge has to be controlled to the maximum extent practicable. 4 syllables, practicable, meaning it's achievable with readily available means. Okay, so but the act, whoops, I'm sorry. The act didn't say, here's what MEP is. It didn't say then, it doesn't say now. Well, here's what maximum extent practicable means. It was left to the permit issuance authorities, the permit authorities to figure that out. And I think Seth said yesterday that we now have hundreds of phase 1s and 6,500 phase 2s. That's a lot of figuring. And so EPA helped us out by coming out with rules that say for phase 2, for the ones that were not either medium or large MS4s, for phase 2, we're going to come out with a rule that says if you do these things, we will consider that you have met maximum extent practicable. And there are 6 of them. And you got to do at least those things, so they're called minimum control measures. And number 5 on that list is post-construction runoff control. So every MS4 in the country that's a phase 2 has to do it, and the phase 1s it's going to be in their permit. All their permits might be a little bit different. They're going to get whatever the city and the permit authority can agree on, but then it has to be signed off by the regional EPA office, and they're not going to agree to it unless it has a post-construction control requirement in it. Permit authorities have to follow EPA rules. Tennessee was authorized at the very end of 1977, which is what moved me out of the field office where I was an inspector, entry-level inspector in the Appalachia part of Tennessee. I did strip mining, oil wells, all the way up to Oak Ridge National Laboratories. But when we got the NPDES delegation or authorization, I had a feeling that that program might go somewhere. And so I was offered an opportunity in the central office and moved there. Tennessee we got our authority in late '77, as I said. Some people were ahead of us. The bulk of people were behind. I really don't know when you guys got your authorization. But the status is now that all but 3 states are authorized. Idaho, the most recent state to be authorized, and they're still in the ramp up of their transfer. And Tennessee got our authorization the same reason that most states did, and that was to keep EPA out. It's the reason that the business community wanted, business and municipalities wanted the states to do it so that EPA would not implement the 402 Clean Water Program. So here's what the MS4s in our area look like, and these are a lot of the cities that I heard you mention yesterday. Now it says Northwest Arkansas Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. But then you see the University of Arkansas is listed down there. So even though the word is municipal, the definition is if it's owned by the government, and it has a drainage system, then it's a MS4. And so in Tennessee, the University of Tennessee is an MS4. Vanderbilt University is not owned by the government. It's not an MS4. And the University of Tennessee is called a non-traditional MS4. So they've all got to have permits to discharge stormwater. And Arkansas does that the same way every other state does. And that they do it by issuance of a general permit. And think of a general permit as like an umbrella. And you've got to get out of the rain. And you can either bring your own umbrella, work it out, or you can write to Arkansas and say, I intend to be covered under your permit. This is my notice of intent to be covered under the general permit that you've issued. And if they do that, as it says, Arkansas requires, as all states do, that they develop and enforce a program. They have an ordinance or authority to require them to achieve the 2 objectives we mentioned earlier. Only stormwater in the storm sewer system, and that stormwater will be controlled to the maximum extent practicable. They've got to have authority to do that. And then it says controls have to target 80% solids removal. Well, okay, solids removal. Well, we heard yesterday that solids aren't the only concern we have in stormwater. We've got nutrients, we've got bacteria, we've got toxics in stormwater. But the only one that's readily measurable and that we've set, and that Arkansas and other states are targeting, is solids removal. And the way that works isn't that you actually have to demonstrate by science that you've removed 80%. What happens is you have to put into play practices that are recognized as capable of meeting 80% removal. You can describe how, in order to be approved, to have a permit issued, for Arkansas to say, yes, I know you intend to be covered under my general permit, but let me see how you're going to meet those. Let me see how you're going to do the 6 things that I told you have to do. Okay, Arkansas, here's how I intend to do them. For every one of those 6 minimum control measures, here's what I'm going to do, here's who's going to do it, here's when it's going to be done. I'm going to do this in the 3rd year of my 5-year program. I'm going to do this every quarter as I do it. Here's how I'm going to do it. And by the way, at the end of it all, here's how I'm going to evaluate this to see how it's working so that when I start over in a new permit term, I'll be able to correct things and make them better. And thanks to a court decision that's commonly called the remand rule, what the MS4 says about what it's going to do has to be clear, specific, and measurable. And measurable means just what it sounds like. And part of, for our minimum control measure, number 5, post-construction control, part of what that means is how are you going to ensure the long-term maintenance of this post-construction control? How is it you're going to do that? We talked about maintenance yesterday. That's where I want to go to today. How long do post-construction controls need to be maintained? Really, as long as the impervious surface or the change is going to be there. It has to be there the same length of time. If it's just there for a short period of time, it's just the agency will forget about it after a while. The politics will change, and we'll be able we'll be able to put a tennis court there. We'll be able to use that property the way we want to. They'll quit making us do this. They'll lose interest in it after a while. If that happens, we've reversed ourselves on our commitment that we made yesterday to make friends with stormwater, to manage it in a way that it doesn't present a risk to public safety and health. And so that's where we're going. How can we do that? This slide says it's on us to do what we said that we would do. MS4s say when they send in their stormwater management program, here's how I will do things. Almost invariably, they say, we will require property owners to maintain post-construction stormwater control measures. We're using the term SCM now instead of BMP because the B in BMP was offensive to some folks. The best, you can't make me do the best. I'll do a pretty good job, but everybody can't be the best, so we're sort of phasing out of that. But stormwater control measures have to be maintained. MS4s say how they're going to do it, and almost invariably they say, well, we're going to have the property owner do it. The property owner is going to do inspections, and they're going to find out if they've got any problems, and they're going to fix those problems, and they're going to let us know that they've done it, and we'll put them on a list saying that that's been taken care of. This is some of the controls that we talked about yesterday, and they're the same sort of controls that we're talking about when we say how are you going to maintain these controls. Here's what Arkansas's permit looks like. And here's the post-construction control requirement, the longevity part of the post-construction control requirement. It says the permittee shall ensure adequate long-term operation and maintenance. Now, it doesn't say a whole lot more than that. I wish it did. I'd like for it to have gone a bit deeper, but it says you're going to do it. You figure it out. So now I'm going to get into Metro Nashville. Metro, and we call it Metro. Nashville is metropolitan government, so it's all 600 and something square miles or one government. And it has what I consider to be the highest performing MS4 in Tennessee. I mean, we have some good MS4s, but Metro they've got a bigger staff, and they've got They've got, their government is more environmentally friendly than other governments. And they are so because they've got 30-something people on city council. When Metro government was formed, all the little governments got to have a seat on the council. So with 30-something, it's harder to get, I mean, there's going to be somebody that's thinking right in that bigger group. So I'm going to take a dive into how Metro does this. We saw an LID manual. I've gotten into that one. I think it's wonderful. But the truth is, I've been all over the country. I haven't found one that wasn't really good. And yours is good here. But Nashville has their own manual, their own stormwater management manual. And I hope you can see these from where you are, but it says wet ponds, wetlands, bioretention, surface sand filters. There's so much work that's gone into this. And of course, what's happened is they hired the same consultant that other cities have hired. I mean, they didn't do this from scratch. They had a top-level consultant come in and say, you know, for you guys, how would this work? And that's what they settled on. But let's just think for a minute about that top item is wet ponds on that list. Now there are a lot of items there. Here's the wet ponds item. There are 25 pages in this manual on wet pond design. 25 pages, and for every single one of these, there may be that many or more, but the manual is exhaustive. And so other cities in the vicinity of Nashville, other Middle Tennessee towns are going to say, you know what, we're going to adopt what Metro does, which is handy because one, it gives us something to shoot at, and secondly, the builders who are building in my town, Mount Juliet, Tennessee, are also building in Metro, so they're familiar with the design manual and with those practices. But you don't want to do your own. There are no phase twos want to develop their own manual. They want to adopt the manual that Leaf showed us, or they could adopt Metro's manual if they wanted to. There's nothing that keeps them, nothing that requires them to stay in state. They could adopt anything they want to. Or what they tend to do is adopt Metro's manual and say, we're adopting Metro's manual, but on this page, we want this thing to be a little bit different. And here's the only exception. Otherwise, everything is just what Metro has. Okay. And so in the manual, Metro goes down that list and says, here's the credit that we're going to, if you put in what we've designed, you follow our design, you build it the way we told you to, this is the amount of credit we expect to give you. And so that first list is green infrastructure practices. We've got two levels back here in our design, the pictures. If you do by level 1, we're going to say that we get 60% removal. Well, that's not enough. You can do it, but you'd have to follow it with something else. You'd have to get, if you did 60%, and then you did 50%, engineers tell them, what is that? 85%, is that right? And then the one below that is PTP, that stands for permanent treatment practice. So if you just go with a wet pond, you're in. You've got your 80%, and you're where you're required to be. Okay. So Nashville requires owners to agree to long-term maintenance, and they have a owner's agreement. Every MS4 has an owner's agreement that unless they've decided owners are not going to be held responsible, they've got an owner's agreement. And here's what this one says is you've agreed, you've put your name on the line, you've agreed to long-term maintenance, continuation of measures, you're going to You're going to send us an annual report that your stormwater control measure is still controlling stormwater. And Nashville has over 6,000 SCMs in place. It's just kind of like Marley's ghost. You know, I wear in death the chain I forged. In life it gets longer. The longer you live, the longer that chain gets. And Metro's over 6,000 stormwater control measures. That's not 6,000 property owners. Some property owners may have more than one measure on their property. On the other hand, Goodlettsville, the town just north of Nashville, has a couple of dozen stormwater control measures. So it's a more finite number than what Metro has. You're going to file reports. You're going to give us. We can come on your property and check this thing out. If we find out you failed to maintain, we can fix it if we want. If you don't fix it, we can fix it and we can charge you for it. If we have to go to a court, you're going to pay the expenses, and we've got an enforcement response plan. Enforcement response plan is one of the best tools that MS4s can have. They need to say super explicitly what they will do. If this is what we see, this is what we will do about it. No exceptions. And that keeps people from telling our folks who they know downtown or threatening them with potential enforcement. What else am I going to say here? Okay, so Metro has a website. You can get on, if you just type in Metro, Nashville, Stormwater, Post Control, all this stuff pops up. Metro's got a website, and the website says the current property owner is legally responsible for inspecting and maintaining stormwater control measures. This is what almost all MS4s are doing. You're going to throw it all entirely over on the property owner. Metro stands a better chance of getting away with that or being successful with it than other governments, than Mount Juliet, Tennessee. And the reason is that Metro has management that's going to allow them to do enforcement. A lot of MS4s, that's not the case. I've taught my course from New Mexico to Maine, and half of the MS4s that come in and sit in front of me just like this will tell me that they've not eliminated illicit discharges and they've not enforced post-construction failure to do post-construction maintenance. Okay, so here's what you can do on Metro's site. You can get on and you can find out if you have a stormwater control measure on your property. But you can also find out if your neighbor has a stormwater control measure on his or her property, or somebody in your neighborhood has one. And by drilling down this set of web locations, you can find out you can get some information on what that thing is supposed to look like. What's it supposed to be? And some meddlesome geriatric might be driving through and say, you know what? I see the picture of how it was when it was functional, but now it doesn't look like that. And so I want to know what you're going to do about it. Here's some detail. And so this is what if an MS4 is going to leave the responsibility on the property owners, they need a system like this so that the MS4 itself, but also the general public, will know, in order for stormwater to be controlled, in order for pollutants to be removed, and in order for flood risk to be addressed, all of these controls have to be working. If they're not all working, then we're not managing flood risk. We're seeing the flood risk that we saw here in photos yesterday. And so if your MS4 or the MS4 that you're associated with, or your client MS4, really needs to be looking this far out and making all this information available so that the owner or anyone can get details on how the site is supposed to be. Let me turn this on. Okay, I think I said Metro has over 6,000 of these things. This is the report that they expect to get in. This is their annual inspection and maintenance report. So they expect to get 6,000 of these every year. Metro has how many FTEs on post-construction? What do you think? 5 FTEs on post-construction in Nashville. And the woman in charge of that program says, here's what I do. She says, I've got 6,000 of these are supposed to come in. 3,000 are going to come in on time. I set them in a pile. I never fool with them again. That leaves me 3,000. I send them a warning letter. Half of those are going to come in. I put them in the same pile. The 25% who were late on the first time, late on the second round, that's where I do my inspections. And that's where I send the inspectors out. So Metro has instructions for the property owners that are supposed to be sending in that form. And those instructions are in detail. They've got one for every type of stormwater control measure that you might have on your property. They've got some instructions. Go look at this, see how this is going. Every one of these things is an openable site. They've got a checklist for bioretention. Here are the things that are on that list. Every single thing on this list should be dealt with. Here's the second page of that same checklist. And then they've gone through and identified contractors who have asked to be on the list. Now, Metro hadn't certified, hadn't done training for these contractors. If you say you are a contractor and that you'll provide these services, you'll be on the list. But this is on the website. So some of the maintenance that's required would be easily dealt with by a homeowner. Some of that maintenance requires some skills or equipment that the homeowner may not have, and so they would be needing to get in touch with one of these contractors. Here are the approved proprietary devices that can be put in place, and there's a contact listed for every single one of these. Here's the maintenance guide for all of those devices. We've got a maintenance guide. Every one of these things, there's aquafilter at the top of this list. Here's aquafilter. Every one of these will hyperlink out to here's how you maintain the device that's in your yard. Okay, so this is the most recent stats that I have on how it's working out for Metro. They did a period, 6 months or so, a couple of years ago. They said, okay, we're going to put all of this information together. We're going to track this and see how it's going. The number of sites that they looked at during that time was 470. The number of individual controls, 812. So almost 2 on average, almost 2 controls per site. And here's how they broke down between the different types: the bioretention, permeable pavement, dry detention ponds, proprietary devices, and something else. Half of those had only minor issues, or less than half of those had no maintenance or minor issues. Less than half, and that's in Metro. With all the helps, all the helper sites, all the availability of information on the site, less than half of them are fully functional. What does that mean when it rains? It's not what it should be. So they took some pictures. This is a infiltration that's supposed to happen here, but it's played it out because clay has settled on it, and it's nominally impervious now. It needs to be. This is probably beyond the capability of the property owner to fix this. Here's bioretention. It says curb inlets have eroded because of improper sizing, so that may be beyond the capacity of that property owner. High plant mortality. You know, I was talking to somebody yesterday about the importance, you know, you either know your plants or you don't. And if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot 12 months a year and you say, is it a good day to plant grass seed? It's a great day to plant grass seed. You may as well go to McDonald's and ask if it's a good day to buy a hamburger. It's going to be a good day. But that's not the case, and we find a lot of plants just don't. They look great on the shelf, but they don't make it in the field. And so those are issues perhaps beyond the capacity of the homeowner or business owner to fix. Proprietary devices, they've got to be maintained. Filters work well for a while, and then they've got to be maintained. And does the property owner know how to do that? Well, they might know how to do it. Are they inclined to do it? Well, not in this case. And my favorite, this is a bioretention area, but this is at a condo. This condo is owned, at the time this picture was taken, I won't identify this person, but at the time this picture was taken, the condo is owned by the kicker on the Tennessee Titans football team. He's got a house someplace else, but he's got a condo in town for when the Titans are in town. And he decides he wants a hot tub, and he puts it right on top of the bioretention area there, which is, it's got to make it less functional, right? Where am I on my notes? So looking back, the property owner responsible program is what Metro has. It's what almost all MS4s in Tennessee have. It says we're going to have an enforceable agreement, we have owner's manual, we're going to do training, we've got tracking, we've got support. I mean, really, they've gone over. It seems to me hard to argue, well, how the hell did I know what I was supposed to do? Because we put it all out there for you. They send out very pleasant young staff folks that get along with people better than cynical geriatrics do. And they've done everything they could. They've got owner support. They've identified who the helpers could be. That's one option. But my note says, even the best of these are only partially effective. Metro, as good as their program is, they figured that they were 55% had problems. Had they not gone out to see those sites, those 55% would be dysfunctional. That's a lot of stormwater management not happening. And so I've gotten concerned about that and am suggesting to MS4s that they consider some mix or some hybrid, perhaps all the way to MS4 responsible. And there's a small town outside Metro that just says, we're going to do it all. We're going to do this all ourselves. We've got a stormwater utility. A stormwater utility is where, I hope you guys all have stormwater utilities, but a stormwater utility is a way to fund the stormwater program based on monthly fees from what's called an ERU equivalent residential unit. And those fees go anywhere from a little over $1 a month in San Antonio to $13 a month in Chattanooga. They're not expensive. They're as reasonable as charging people for their water or their electricity, trash pickup, newspaper delivery. That's a service that the city is providing you. Now, you don't have to pay for that service if you don't want to. If you want to pick up your stormwater yourself and get rid of it yourself, you can. You can put a moat all the way around your place and get rid of your stormwater yourself. But you're not going to be able to do it for $1 a month or $13 a month. And a lot of MS4s allow the property owner to offset or reduce that cost if they put in some extra stormwater control measures that weren't already required. But the Stormwater Responsible Program, MS4 Responsible Program, I've got in my slide here, it says much more dependable. Certainly it is, because you're in charge of everything that goes on. It does cost you some money. You might be able to say, you know what, we're just going to use these stormwater control measures, and we're going to use them everywhere, because we're going to use them everywhere. We've got the equipment on a trailer that will be appropriate for maintenance of every one of these things. We're going to do less enforcement because we're doing this stuff ourselves. We won't need to do enforcement. If somebody has damaged or destroyed a control measure, yes, you'll have to do enforcement, but you will not have to do enforcement for failure to inspect in the first place, because they weren't required to do that. You won't have to do enforcement for failure to fix it, because they're not the fixer people. You're going to do less education, and at the bottom of it, the owners strongly prefer not to be responsible for doing something while they own it, and they also consider it to be a demerit against their property when they go to sell their property. Well, it's happy that you like the house, but I got to tell you, you're going to have to do this. Here's what you're going to have to do every year as long as you live here forever. And there's what this slide says. How much more does it really cost? You know, when I bring this up to MS4, say, oh man, that's going to cost us a lot. Michael, my friend at Metro, says he might send his staff out there 3 or 4 times. If he has to do enforcement, there's a cost associated with that. And then at the heart of it, I said, well, okay, Michael, you like property owner responsible. What happens when somebody's property gets flooded and they go to council and they say, Mr. Attorney or Ms. Attorney, my property was flooded. I want you to find out whose fault it was, because it couldn't possibly have been my fault. And that person goes and picks up Metro's annual report and says, over half the stormwater control measures are dysfunctional. They were dysfunctional. Well, that must be the reason your house flooded. Your Honor, the reason the house flooded was because the stormwater control measures weren't being insured as the permit requires. State law requires it. Federal law requires it. You're in the business of enforcing state and federal law. So, my last line on here is one round of bad politics. You know, you can have a local government that's all over environmental protection, but the next election comes in and that person comes to the stormwater manager and says, I hate you. I mean, there's a woman in a town next to, not far from Nashville, that came to me and she says, my mayor hates me. He says he hates me because he hates this program. He's personally in violation. His own property is in violation. He hates that I'm trying to enforce it. And he won't let me enforce this anymore. And that's not just Nashville. It's not just the Southeast. You know, I've heard all I want to hear about the Southeast being worse than other parts of the country. It's Kansas. I've taught this class in almost every region, from Maine south. There's a mix. There are some situations that are good and some not so good. And so here's the suggestion that I'm going to leave you with. MS4 should fully consider the costs and benefits of both alternatives. And I told Morgan if I were redoing this, I wouldn't use the word both. I would use a word like all, because there's a mix. You know, you might say, well, the MS4 is going to do the initial inspection and the property owner will do the fix. Or you can hybridize this however, whatever makes sense. But what I don't want us to do anymore is for the MS4 to say, okay, let's get a property owner's agreement off the website and put our name in where it says MS4, and let's get everybody to sign it. That's just as thoughtless as it is to say, okay, you bring me the topo, draw 360 degrees of silt fence, and let's get started. You know, silt fence is not always the best answer. I mean, we know that now. It's just, but you're still seeing it. You're still seeing silt fence 360 degrees around the perimeter of the site. You know, why is that? It's, you know, we have engineers that are on the site, that are sending in SWIPs that have never been to the site. And the engineers that, and I don't know them because they don't come to the professional meetings. They're busy sending in more plans. All right, so that's my suggestion, and it's part of our answer to in 10 years, what would we wish we had done to protect the Illinois River. So let me stop there and take questions or get arguments, which I love to get. Hear somebody else's experience. How much time do we have?
We've got time for a couple questions. Any? I have one for you. So you've got 6,000 control features in place, and 55% of them are not functioning properly. Has the metro area done any kind of network analysis to see what the relationship and try to link these into an overall effectiveness in terms of stormwater controls? Well,
I mean, the best way to do that would, of course, be to measure, but I don't know that they've been able to do it by measuring streams and saying, well, we've got this many controls, and we can see that the water's a little bit higher or a little bit lower than it would otherwise have been. You know, that's the thing. You know, it's the tragedy of the commons. You know, everybody knows that the story. The people will only do what they'll only go to any trouble or any expense to do something if they find it to be in their personal interest. And so it's just tough getting people to do the right thing. But no, but the answer to your question is not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from experience here in Northwest Arkansas? All right, thank you very much, Paul.